I want to look at Isaiah chapter 26 tonight. Obviously, I have a book here, and I'm not going to preach the book. I'm going to jump into the middle. And what I want to begin with tonight, those of you that are listening in for live, or if you're watching this via the recording, I want to jump in and talk about the characteristics of the Leviathan spirit and help us understand this systematic delusion. I want to make some application to us, for us, in terms of personal, but a lot of what I want to talk about will be cultural. But Leviathan is the king, the ruler, the one who has dominion over the children produced by pride. Now, again, some people misquote that and they say, like, he's the king of the children. In other words, as if he produces pride, but that's not true. He rules or gains dominion through pride, or the people who are under the sway are produced by, behaviors produced by, lifestyles produced by pride. And as you know, if you've been through level 1 and had the Impact Weekend, our number one, first on the list, root issue is the root of pride. Because pride is deception. And pride that becomes systematic is delusion. And some people can fall into a strong delusion. And you just look at them and you listen to them speak and you watch their behaviors and you're like, and you talk to them and it's like it just doesn't get through. You know, their filtering system, you say one thing and their filtering system causes them to hear something else. The level of confusion is so immediate and so debilitating that you just watch them walk into destruction and do ridiculous things. And so, but a culture can experience the same kind of delusion. It'd be systematic delusion. And when you look at the history of nations, you'll see nations that if you observe their thinking, their worldview, the way in which they function, you look at the destruction and the degradation of their lifestyles and their communities and their economies, and you just look at those at the path of delusion that they walked in. And to you, it's so obvious, you just wonder, how could people be so deceived? And so, let's begin with this concept, because those of you who are in WLI have had training in what people call the Seven Mountains Mandate, which is simply the idea that originally came from Francis Schaeffer, and then was developed some by Bill Bright, and by the leader of a missions group, which I can't think of the name of right now, into this idea that all cultures, all nations are influenced by 7 major cultural influences that they called mountains. And then that's been developed into this idea of the 7 Mountain Mandate, that in order to disciple a culture, you need to have influence in every one of these mountains. Now, I intend to offer some updates to that, but I'm not certain that I think we're hitting that problem. In other words, what I think we need to do is stop looking at the cultures of nations to understand how to change them. And first we need to look at the culture of the kingdom. And then once the culture of the kingdom is strong, and the 7 influencers are going to be 7 different mountains in the culture of the kingdom than they are in what we call natural cultures. Once kingdom culture is strong, then the kingdom will begin to impact other kingdoms. Yeah. So, I'm going to offer some updates to that, because I don't have enough enemies right now, so I was just hoping to offend more people. So I'm working on that. So 26 of Isaiah is a discourse that leads us into verse 1 of 27. And verse 27, or verse 1 of chapter 27 of Isaiah says that there is a dragon or a serpent, and there was 7 heads. These, of course, these are prophetic words, prophetic symbolization. The same way Daniel saw the beast coming out of the ocean, coming out of the sea, and these represented ancient kingdoms. He saw these lion and the leopard and the bear and the monster, which was Rome, and he saw these ancient kingdoms represented by animals, this is another way that God helps us understand the characteristics of a spiritual condition produced by demons, cosmic dominators, rulers, principalities of the kingdom of darkness. So we have a spiritual condition produced by demonic influence. The character of the demons manifests in the condition. The condition manifests in the delusion. We know this personally happens in each one of us. For example, Paul says to Timothy, God has not given us a spirit of fear. So what we understand is that fear is a condition, a spiritual condition produced by demons who have that characteristic. In other words, fear is their character. And when they influence, they produce spiritual conditions of fear, which then can manifest in terror and dread and worry and anxiety and depression and other forms of fear, depending on the way in which that fear becomes systematic in the person. God didn't give us a spirit of fear, but instead, He gave us love, which tells us that that's one aspect. That fear, the spirit of fear, begins to diminish, begins to attack our sense of love, our ability to receive love, our ability to release love, because perfect love, matured love, or ultimate love casts out all fear. Because in fear, there's torment. So the purpose of fear is torment. But He's given us love and power. Because fear causes us to hesitate instead of being bold. And so it doesn't matter how much power you have if you're not exerting or exercising the power. Because of fear, you hesitate and you lack boldness. So we're in a season of boldness. Everybody in this room is a person of boldness. Amen. We're not backing up, we're stepping forward. If you hit us, we hit back twice as hard.
Amen. That's right.
A lot of people see people get scared. I've had people do that. Even in this ministry. I wish you'd stop talking like that. I know the devil's going to get mad. And it's kind of like, honey, you need to find there's a big church down the street. You might go to the balcony down there. But if you're going to be in here, you better get ready because we're moving forward. I'm getting ready to punch the devil in the nose. I know that'll make him mad, but since when is being afraid of him a biblical idea? Submit to God, which means you obey. Resist the devil. Don't ignore him. Don't placate him. Don't negotiate with him. And worse, or do what we do normally now and moderns do, is they play by his rules. So somehow or another, if we don't play by the devil's rules, then we think we're not playing fair. I don't play by the devil's rules. I play by God's rules. And God's sense of fairness and God's sense of justice may not be your sense of fairness and your sense of justice, but if you don't function by God's rules, you're going to be the loser. Yeah. And one of the things the enemy wants you to do is negotiate. We don't negotiate. Stop negotiating. Stop trying to find a way to live with it when God wants to give you a way to live without it.
Yes. Amen.
And so we've been so pressed and impressed by moral victories now for 3 or 4 generations that we continue to lose nations that God wants us to have as possessions of the kingdom. And by that I don't mean politically, having a theocracy where we dictate to people how to live. What I'm talking about is influence.
That's right.
Because right now the influence of the church is simply go over there in your box every Sunday morning, do whatever you want, keep your nose out of the business of the culture.
Right.
When Jesus wants us to disciple cultures, have influence in the culture. We have something to say that represents the creator of this universe. It needs to be said, it needs to be heard, it needs to have impact, and then it needs to be enforced by spiritual power. Does that make sense? Excuse me, what was I talking about? Oh, the 7 heads. So the answer, when we talk about the 7 concept, was 7 meaning complete. The complete influence of God's kingdom on a culture. Leviathan is the complete influence of darkness on cultures. And every nation then manifests different behaviors, different delusions based on the character of the rulers and principalities who function in those nations. that's India. There's a manifestation of the character of the principalities and the cosmic dominators, which is the word that Paul uses, manifests in India. It manifests in the cultures of India. Manifests in the cultures of nations of Africa. It manifests in the culture of Puerto Rico. It manifests in the culture of Jacksonville in a subcultural sense. And it manifests in the culture of the United States or Britain or France or of any Arabic nation or Muslim nation or China. See, there's a spiritual influence which brings dominating influence into the culture, and that manifests something of the character of the kingdom of darkness. And then the children of disobedience, or the people of those cultures, are playing out this delusion or this deception in their own lives. So God's answer was to have nations like the United States, Brazil, South Korea, other nations that have been fathering nations, Israel being the initializing nation in history. He's chosen nations as remnant nations, and he puts into those cultures what he wants the other cultures in the earth to experience. Deuteronomy chapter 4, Deuteronomy chapter 32 explain these ideas. And so when we see the seven-headed dragon, what we're seeing in prophetic terminology is something in the sea or in humanity that comes up on the land. This represents the idea that he's coming, he's already operating, but he intends to take dominion or a dominion dominating position. And Isaiah 27 explains both the character of this spirit and God's response to it. Does that make any sense? Now, the rest of the chapter has to do with restoration. Let me say that anytime we have a direct confrontation with Leviathan, it is because God has come to visit our lives or a nation to bring a restoration of purpose. I'm not going to explain all that in the book and in other teachings. Let me say that again. Anytime we have a direct confrontation with Leviathan, we have reached a moment in the history of our personal lives, ministry, region, nation, when God is coming for a visitation. And the purpose of this visitation is to bring us to an accounting for how well we are living out purpose and to restore purpose where it's been diminished. And we see that both in chapter 26 and 27 as Isaiah, through prophetic language, talks about the vineyard God's establishing, talks about the refuge that's failed, and talks about the fact that the need of restoration becomes apparent because when God says, here's your purpose, and here's how well you're fulfilling your purpose, then God says, okay, to move you back into the ultimate fulfillment of purpose, I need to take these steps. And when God comes to move us from where we are back into the fullness of purpose, he always encounters Leviathan. Because the purpose of Leviathan is a systematic deception or delusion that moves us away from purpose. It began with Satan, and that's where pride becomes the most basic root, and why deception is his most powerful tool. Because he was so deluded himself that he said, I'm so amazing, I could be God. Nothing new about that in history, because that's exactly what he said to Adam and Eve. That God said, God's holding out on you. If you go eat that, you'll be just like God if you go eat that tree. That's why he doesn't want you to eat it, because he knows if you eat it, you'll be God. And so this deception is so basic that, it's almost overly simplistic, but it's actually the basis for the delusion of every culture and the deception of every person in history. And God speaks about Leviathan in several places, and in doing so, he describes for us, through something natural, a means for us to understand something spiritual. Now, there are some specifics that I want to talk about in describing Leviathan, and then I want to talk about God's sword and what God's going to do about it. And the reason why I want you to see it, the Leviathan, as systematic is the descriptions that are given here of Leviathan in this verse. His character and his role in dominion. So not a surprising number of times where Leviathan appears in the scriptures. And I'm not going to take time to talk about that. Revelation 12:9 says, the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceives the whole world. So it kind of sums up this whole Leviathan concept. Leviathan, serpent, dragon, tanyin is is the Hebrew term coming from this word tan, and we'll see why. The Leviathan is a Hebrew word, and tanyin is another Hebrew word, and both of them mean and refer to the same concept in the spirit of a condition produced by cosmic dominators or spiritual rulers and principalities. This is a manifestation of the kingdom of darkness in the earth, in individual people, and in nations. It began, as I said, in the Garden of Eden, and this spiritual function and systematic delusion is operated in some way and in different ways and at different levels in all the nations of history and all of the places in the earth. So the second term, the word tanyin, comes from tan, to speak of serpents, or of sea or river monsters, dragons, whales, poisonous snakes. All are included in this word tan. And in just about everywhere I've been in the nations, the First Nations people, the people who are had the most affinity with the land itself, always had some serpent worship, some form of serpent worship, tied to the fact that rivers look like twisting snakes, tied to the fact that they had myths of creation or myths and delusional concepts of where they came from, or their sense of how things really work in the spirit, had some form of serpent motive to it. So their way of explaining things, why is the earth, why are things like they are, always included this constant, this continuous theme that speaks back to a reality, a spiritual reality, which they do not understand, but they have enough understanding of its manifestation and enough contact with spiritual reality that they include it in their thinking. So we don't study what heathens say in order to understand it. We listen to what God reveals, because God will always give us all the information we need to win the battle.
That's right.
We don't need to become experts in witchcraft to overcome witchcraft.
That's right.
We don't become experts in Leviathan to overcome Leviathan.
Right.
You don't need to, you don't need to waste thousands of dollars chasing the Illuminati all over the world and the Nephilim all over the world. These are manifestations of the root issue of the principality. What you need to know is, God, what do you intend to do about this so I can be a part of the victory?
That's right.
All right. The rest of it will be a distraction to you. And what will happen is you'll have no grace for it, and you begin to use human strength and human wisdom to attempt to conquer something that can never be conquered by anyone except God.
Amen.
And our place in this is that we represent God in the earth against God's enemies. We love our enemies. We confront God's enemies. We only confront God's enemies because we are pursuing God's purpose. Remember, that's the purpose that He's visiting us to restore. So because we pursue purpose, we become the people God says, hey, I want you to help me, represent me in this process of defeating Leviathan delusion, systematic delusion, so I can move you and a people back toward the fullness of your purpose. God's doing this in the United States of America right now. Can someone bring me that water?
This one right there.
It's right there. Oh, there's some here? Oh, sorry. Well, I had that open. I don't know if that's open. Thank you. I didn't even see that. Thank you. So we are a generation expecting and experiencing a visitation from God, and the visitation is an accounting. God is bringing this nation to an account. And a lot of the political turmoil, a lot of the discussion points that you're seeing as headlines, if you don't interpret them properly, you'll miss the whole point. The whole point is we are being held to account. Even our discussion of racism, which is a good dialogue that's necessary right now. I'm not afraid of that dialogue. It's necessary because God is still bringing us to an accounting for bigotry and racism in this nation. I hate it because God hates it. And God is bringing us to an accounting. So if you miss that point, see, you'll get distracted over here with the systematic delusion. What you need to look at is purpose. And if you don't understand what's happening in terms of purpose, and understand that the reset of purpose is going to is going to escalate this confrontation, then you'll be in fear, or you'll be in turmoil, or you'll just take sides and actually help the enemy in what he's attempting to do. By sides, I mean sides other than being on God's side. Because God isn't on our side. Definitely not on either political party side. That's not how God functions. All right. So you get uncomfortable when I say that. So stop doing that. Start getting bold. Because your boldness is radically important in this season. And begin to discern what is a distraction from what is fundamental to the restoration of purpose. That's where we'll invest our emotional energy. So this word Leviathan is a transliteration of the Hebrew word lava, which means to join together. And here in Florida, Jacksonville, Florida, from where I'm speaking, we of course have alligators. And so, as I said, this word tan can refer to different, serpents, forms of reptilian animals. Even the term dragon is, a part of that. And in Job's 41, God describes how Leviathan's put together, and I believe he's talking about an alligator when he's doing that. And but at least alligator is the best animal we have right now to represent it. As you know, alligators are and crocodiles are pretty ancient. They're pretty primitive, very old in terms of when you look at their function. They look like, something almost out of Jurassic Park. And, they have this sense of reminding you of dinosaurs. Because here in Florida, alligators help us best to understand this idea of Leviathan. And so when he says this sense of joined together, we're talking about how alligator's body is put together in a way that overlapping protection is available. It has tough skin, hide, to the point of that's not the best way to kill an alligator, is to attack it from the outside. And it has this sense, Laval has this sense of bringing together. Now, I don't want to develop this more. Let me mention an idea you may never have had. And that Jesus said, I will build my ecclesia. And the reason why he will build his ecclesia is because Leviathan's already built one. See, darkness has an ecclesia called together into an assembly. Jesus said, I'm going to build mine, and it will displace that one. New thought, I guess. So the variations of this root word mean a wreath or a twist or a coiling. And so when you put the concept together into its prophetic context, see, Isaiah is noting a systematic joining and interweaving of a spiritual condition that has two ideas. And here's the two ideas I want you to get. Leviathan pierces and then twists. Now, if you know how alligators function, they'll grab a hold of you and then roll you. They just roll. And then take you down somewhere once you're drowned, dead, hide you somewhere, and come back later to consume you. But it's this rolling, this twisting, this, just grab a snake by right behind the ears, so to speak, right before its front legs. See, about half this crowd's asleep already. Yeah. So that's when you make these dumb statements to see if people are awake or not. And half of them got a polite little look. That means they tuned out a long time ago and they wondered if Crystal will still be open when he gets done preaching. It is? Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah.
So you grab hold of, one of the things that snake will do is coil itself around your arm. I know, that's gross. But this twisting is the aspect of a spiritual operation. That it worms its way in, so to speak. It pierces into a culture, and then it begins to twist itself in a way that causes it to become a part of that and interweave, say interweave. Interweave itself into every aspect of the culture. So when we're talking about the 7 mountains of influence, this is me. We're responding to the effort of the enemy, who has seen how God wishes to interweave himself into every aspect of culture with kingdom culture. And then the enemy is copying God and saying, well, I'm going to interweave myself into family and government and education, arts and entertainment. I'm going to weave myself into the justice system. I'm going to weave into medicine. I'm going to weave myself into every area of influence in cultures in order to produce a systematic delusion. Now, let's just make it really practical. We'll say this again. It is delusional that the most dangerous place in America for a baby to be is in his mother's womb.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's delusional.
That's right.
Say amen. Shake yourself. I know, see, shake yourself. See how delusional that is. You say, where's the most dangerous place for a baby? You know, floating in the ocean with some sharks? No. Where's the most dangerous place for a baby in America? Exposed to the elements on the street? No. The most dangerous place for a baby in America is in his mother's womb. That is systematic delusion.
Right.
It should make you so livid. Listen to me. You should be mad about that. If you're not mad about that, switch some gears inside someplace and get some anger. You got to have some aggression about the fact we're murdering millions of unborn children and cutting them up in pieces and selling their body parts for money.
Yes.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, that's delusion. See, you've lost your outrage and you need to get it back. You should be angry about that because God's outraged about that. He's coming to this nation. People are like, are we under judgment? I hope so. I hope so. Because if we're not, that means God's already given up on us. His visitation is not for destruction, however. It's for restoration.
Amen.
Amen.
So he twists his way in. And so twisting into medicine, dedicated to the preservation of life, becomes a way of making millions of dollars, destroying the most innocent, vulnerable, and piercing into the very place of the secrets of God, where God's, before your mom even knew you were there, is forming and shaping according to his book the destiny and purpose of the individual, and there pierces Leviathan and destroys the child. Now you should be angry about that. I'm angry about it. So I'm planning on getting over my anger either. But I've been fighting it for a long time and intend to continue. That's one example. One example. I mean, it's delusional for you to go into a government school setting and there to be a picture of Gandhi and everybody's and Muhammad, that's so wonderful. And somebody says Jesus, and they're like, get him out of here, put him in jail, shoot him dead, I mean, you say Jesus, and you're some kind of freak. But if you embrace any other religion in the world, then you're a person who's just a commentator. See, ladies and gentlemen, that's delusional. It doesn't make any sense that you can't sing Jingle Bells, which doesn't have anything to do with Jesus anyway, but it's scary enough. It's just scary enough. That's delusional. Since when is anybody who's human afraid of Jingle Bells? You understand what I'm saying? But they're afraid of Jingle Bells because of a systematic delusion. I mean, my last name is Lynch. This is delusional as well. And I know where I'm walking, and I'm not afraid to walk here. But in Oregon, they're removing the name Lynch from schools because my last name reminds people of people being lynched, of injustice. Now, I live with this because I got like 8 or 10 social media exposures, and I get this stuff all day long about my last name being Lynch. Well, I still haven't figured it out. That's delusional. I don't even know what to say. I ain't hung anybody lately. I mean, I have my own hang-ups. You see, I'm not diminishing the fact that there is a history here. What I'm saying to you, it's delusional to think that if I change my name to Jones, I'd be less offensive to people. I haven't hung anybody. That's delusional. You understand what I'm saying? Does anybody understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay. See, that's irrational. Some of you are afraid because you're not sure where I'm going to go with this. I'm not going any further. I'm just pointing out. That doesn't make sense. It's nonsensical. It's dread of something that doesn't exist. It's fear of something that has no rational basis. Here in Jacksonville, we have a spiritual condition called irrational fear. By the way, it's one of the conditions of this city based upon Leviathan. So I'm just giving you examples of how delusion twists its way into every aspect of culture. Now we have the word marriage that has no meaning whatsoever. People are going to marry robots. They're going to marry dogs. They're going to marry trees. They're going to marry their car. We used to have, my mother the car. Do you remember that? My mother the car, that old TV show. They don't remember that. Yeah, my mother the car. Some kind of goofy. See, that's a worldview problem right there. Your mother can't come back as a car when you're dead, But this was the freaky idea. My mother the car. The car talked to the guy. Yeah, that's the kind of TV black, and as my children think that's the demarking, the line of demarcation for history. Before color television is all the rest of history. Then color television is this part of history. You mean back when there was black and white? Yeah, my mother the car. What's that talking about? Got me on this subject. Huh?
Delusion.
Yeah, marriage. And the fact that it means nothing, and people are going to, marry your wife. My wife the car. Some of you already did that. Oh, okay. Oh, I see. Your wife already. Oh, okay. Accused you. Okay, I got that. It's me or the car, bud. Make up your mind. So, it's delusional. It's just delusional. Until this whole gender equality. There's another delusion. Those are delusional terms within themselves, right? Say yes. Yes. Don't hesitate. Get some boldness. Don't feel like you're going to hurt somebody's feelings because it's delusional. When God creates male and female, it's delusional to assume God created you to be something other than what your plumbing is consistent with. That's delusion. And we're looking at things like how much stupider are we, how much more stupidity is going to become available. Till some guy who's 6'6" is running in races and all the girls can't beat him and he wins all the gold medals and woo, I'm great because I'm really a guy but I identify as a girl. Guys, folks, that's delusion.
Yeah.
That is nothing. I'm not a hater. I'm not a bigot. That's just stupid.
Yeah.
I mean, anybody would have a break and see that's stupid. It doesn't have anything to do with equality. It has to do with stupidity. It's just stupid. That's where delusion takes you. It's the destruction of culture because kingdom culture has a very specific definition for marriage. Say amen.
Amen.
Don't start backing down like, I'm going to hurt some people's feelings. That's West Coast Christianity. This is East Coast Christianity, okay? And how many times have you asked yourself in the last 20 years, how can people be so blind?
Yeah.
How many times have you said, how can people be so easily led around by obviously foolish, fanatical, and foundless ideas? It seems to me the population walking around in a daze, looking at their cell phones and falling into traffic, and flopping into fountains, and just gaga looking at media. And you sit around with your own family, and I text my son who's sitting across the table from me, how you doing? Because everybody at dinner is looking at their cell phone. And I watch my grandchildren just, doing more with my iPad than I figured out what to do with it in 5 years. They have 5 minutes and they know more about my iPad than I do. Because 64% of them would rather have a conversation by texting than by vocalizing or communicating with their voices. You see, we're heading toward a delusional state of mind in which reality is not this is all a spiritually caused and intentional, systematic intrusion into the structures of life. And you and I need to be men and women who not only are not victims of that, who overcome that, but we have the power to pull people out, to snatch them from the burning, and to pull nations and regions out of this systematic delusion.
Yes. Hallelujah. Yes.
Don't get me on how we need to keep the millennials so happy. Let's just pass that over, okay? But I'm not going to redesign ministry to make millennials happy. See, what you guys don't understand is I'm 62 and I've already seen us do this for 4 generations. Because we redefined everything to make those, the 60s, woo, so we redesigned church so the people of the 60s feel good. We did. So the hippies would feel comfortable. Yeah, and I don't hate hippies. Rick is one. Still. All right, I'm just kidding.
I got better.
Oh, you got better. But you understand what I'm saying is you can't continue to redefine the kingdom of God in order to make it relevant to the Leviathan system.
Right.
What you have to do is realize what God was doing in that move of the 60s and the 50s and the 60s. The move of God was an accountability to restore the nation to kingdom culture. But instead of restoring kingdom culture to have influence, we sacrificed kingdom culture to become relevant. And the sexual revolution continued. And lawlessness became more pervasive. And the deterioration of family became pandemic. And the idea that, the Dr. Spock of the 60s is now the guru of your ability to keep your love on. Yes, I did just say that. In modern American evangelical revivalism. Whatever you do, don't make anybody unhappy. And don't discipline and don't correct and don't just ignore your Bible to get a crowd. And you see, we can no longer do that if we want to win this battle. So I'm not trying to be ugly about it. I'm just seriously telling you, we're not going to win this victory until we understand this enemy. All right, so Leviathan rules through pride. In an individual, you understand that as the strongholds, the high thing that raises itself up against what God knows. Here's what God knows. The high thing raises itself up and says, I know more than God. Then it builds a fortress around it to protect it and brings your thoughts into captivity to what's in the fortress. So what we do is we tear down the fortress with weapons that are mighty through God. Exposing the high thing, we bring every thought back into captivity to Christ and continue to process if there are any other disobedient thoughts. And in doing so, we cast down the high imaginations, the high imaginations of the Leviathan delusion of pride. Now this is very painful because it's scary for people when you begin to invade their delusions and invade their dreams, their silliness. And I've discovered as a spiritual father, if I'm the one that's bursting the balloon, I'm the bad guy. But what are you going to do? What kind of spiritual father would you be if all you do is continue to, blow a little more hot air into people's delusions? Because, they're either going to rise up, the balloon will fail, and then, disaster. Or at some point, the balloon's going to pop when they find out they're not going to be all that in a bag of chips. Or whatever it is they think they are. Because what the enemy does is distraction from purpose to produce substitution. That's pride. And this is the number one root issue and the whole concept behind, the book I'm writing about purpose, not potential. Leviathan loves potential. In other words, Leviathan loves to convince you of endless possibilities as long as you'll ignore fundamental purpose. Now, the purpose of our nation, I do have some people can remove the people who disturb me. Pastor Kirk, we may need to deal with this. Distraction. To purpose. The purpose of our nation. We don't create ourselves. Did you know that God creates nations? God creates nations. God does not like globalism. God doesn't like collectivism. What's going on, especially through Europe and the idea of what's being called migration, is nothing at all what is being presented to you by media. And the idea of migration, ladies and gentlemen, we are not animals experiencing evolutionary progress, so we are migrating. That's exactly what you're being told. The whole basis of gender equality is evolution. It's based on the lie of positivism. It's a Jezebel system that says this: the only reason we have wars is because we have men. And men are aggressive. They're out there. They're like Cameron. They're just out there in the wild. Looking for a grizzly bear to wrestle. Bite him in the neck. Suck his blood. That's what all men are. And when they're not doing that, then, they can only think about one thing. They're either out there biting grizzlies in the neck or they want sex. That's what men. That's it. Yeah. Personally, I just leave the grizzlies alone and go for the sex. That's what I think. Women say, do men think about anything else? I'm like, of course not. Was there a point? Why? And so in modern times, when women should be have respect for men, they're disgusted by them. And this has caused a deterioration of society to the point where the Leviathan infiltration and through positivism says we need to have cultures dominated by the feminine side, or else we need to emasculate men so they act more feminist, because this would stop aggression, stop war, and cause universal peace. Well, I look like a person who's in favor of that idea. I'm going to tell you that God's not in favor. Amen. Men, it's time for you to get your maleness back.
Yeah, that's right.
Get some aggression back. I mean, quit lying down and stand up. Is anybody listening to me?
Yes.
Nothing wrong with being a red-blooded man. Get out there and kill something. You know what I mean? That's what I'm going to go out in Arizona. I'm going to go out and find something that's living, and I'm going to shoot it dead. Okay? I'm going to be a real man. That's somewhat facetious, but on the other side of it, I don't feel ashamed of it.
Amen.
I've shot Bambi several times and intend to shoot him again. So, and his mom. So, and I'd feel better if it was his dad that I shot. So, you know, I'm not Disneyized. I'm not so Disneyized that I think I've shot Bambi because I'm a hunter. See, some of you are all worried about that, but you know, I had nothing but brothers, and we raised nothing but sons, and so, you know, it's just a lot of testosterone that flows around a Lynch family. So, poor Ruth Ann, right? Yeah. So what are you talking about? I'm talking about the infiltration of Leviathan deception.
Yeah.
Because God is the one who creates nations. And God is not in favor of globalism. And so, the reason I say this is because you have to understand the enemy we're fighting right now is at an international level. Do not take on, and listen carefully, do not take on a Leviathan system if you don't have an apostolic order.
That's right.
Because without apostolic order, you will not have the international level of spiritual power and authority available at the local level to win this battle. Now, ladies and gentlemen, here in our own ministry, there's the battle. The battle for an apostolic order is here. We're going to win this battle.
Amen.
The battle against a fathering leadership is here. Freedom House, Ministry Matrix. We're going to win this battle.
Amen.
Because without that order, we cannot fulfill our purpose. Without me providing that kind of leadership, fathering leadership in your life, you're not going to be ready for the battle that's right in front of you, and you cannot escape this battle. I don't care where you go. Run as far as you want to run. It's your assignment. So if that's your assignment and you run, all you're doing is giving in to Python. You're giving in to Leviathan, and you're welcoming Jezebel to be a part of your life and ministry. You're appeasing what God wants you to overcome. Can you say amen?
Amen.
All right. So, in the person, that's what we see. Now, if we look at Leviathan in the culture, what does pride look like in a culture? It's a systematic delusion. It's a substitute of a different purpose for the originating purpose. Systematic is characteristic of Leviathan's scales in the sense of joined together, woven, twisted, coiling, all these ideas of systematic is a way of expressing the term system, a matrix, an ecosystem, a spiritual ecosystem. And Leviathan, you see, begins to insert itself, making inroads of delusion into every aspect of culture. Now, recently in Brazil, when I was in Brazil, they had a naked man come into an art museum, surrounded by little girls, 3, 4, and 5 years old. And they had the naked man to lie down naked and had the girls come up giggling and now touch him all over. Cameras rolling, people celebrating, breaking down these barriers. Of course, then they arrested the guy, as they should have, because of the outrage.
Yeah.
See, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the inroads of delusion. Is there anything about that experience that sounds like art to you?
No.
I mean, unless the guy's name is art. But maybe this guy's name was Arthur. I don't know. That's delusional. Good thing I wasn't there.
That's right.
Can you imagine if that was my daughter, 4 years old? I'll tell you what art would look like. Okay? There would be some fine art that art would end up looking like. Yeah. You heard of impressionist paintings? That's right. Art's new name would be Blob. Or Bob, because it was floating upside down in the river. That's delusional.
Yeah.
We have this kind of delusional stuff going on in the arts all over the place. It's delusional. You know, I could go down this road of talking about movies and talking about video games and talking about cartoons. Well, I used to call them cartoons. I don't know what you call them now. But I'll tell you one thing. If you have children, don't let them watch. I mean, you know, we try to find something even on an iPad that our grandchildren can look at. And if you don't watch them like a hawk,
It's true, man.
there's going to be zombies popping up, and you know, and the Christmas witch, and I don't know what else will be popping up into things that it's like, you know, what happened to teaching kids 1, 2, 3 and a couple of kittens meowing and a duck quacking when suddenly we need to have the Christmas witch and 17 zombies in there? Where does this stuff come from? Leviathan. Insertions in a systematic way. Don't even get me on education. You don't even want to go there, right? I mean, look at the mess we're at in college campuses, assuming where we must be in what's being done now with children even before what I used to call kindergarten. The intrusion into the family of things that should be completely left to parents. That this systematic intrusion of Leviathan is not only diminishing marriage, but diminishing parental authority, parental input, all in the guise of progress. Now, let's move on quickly. Say amen quickly. Amen. There you go. About what God's going to do. Because this is what we need. God said he will visit the Leviathan with his sword. He will bring this Leviathan system to account in the same way he's bringing us to an account. You need to be really thrilled about the fact that God's bringing the church to an account.
Yes.
Because while he's bringing us to an accounting, he's bringing the enemy to an account.
Thank you, Lord.
The serpent inserted itself into God's design and twisted them into perversions, piercing, weaving itself into the fabric of its design purpose and using God's people, places, and generations to produce an unholy result. God's not happy, so he's going to lift his sword. He's going to wield his sword, his word, the rhema of his spirit, the revelation of his expectations. And right here in Isaiah, he talks about how he's going to do that. The revelation that visits Leviathan will be an empowered word of restoration. The revelation that visits Leviathan will be an empowered word of restoration. Hey, church! The revelation that visits Leviathan and brings him to an accounting will be an empowered word of restoration. Because all transformation is restoration. When he transforms, it's because he's restoring his original intention. 3 specific characteristics of God's sword against Leviathan. Number 1, kashah in the Greek or the Hebrew, it's unrelenting. Once the process begins, listen, Freedom House, listen, everybody who's listening to me. But some of you are saying, you know, what do we do now? We know we're assigned to do something with Leviathan. Okay. Once the process begins, the process must be unrelenting. You cannot short circuit the process without losing the battle. Once you engage, once you bite that grizzly on the neck, Cameron, you can't step back and say, hey, would you like to talk about this? Once the visitation begins, you will either see the turning of the culture or you will hear this word, one stone shall not be left upon another. Your house will be left unto you desolate. I'll pull out a remnant and move on with the purpose without you. But once the process begins, God's sword, once he pulls the sword, he will not back down. Now that's true in your own life. And that's a whole message. That's a whole series you can preach right there. See, once you get face to face, once God's hand on your life becomes God's grip on your life. Just ask Jonah. Once you get in the grip of God, it doesn't matter where you go. God will vomit you where you belong.
Praise God.
Right?
Yes.
Now think about that in terms of a nation. Think about God's sword coming out against Leviathan And God, and then the church saying, well, Lord, let's just talk about this. And we have let's have a committee meeting. Or whatever else modern churchianity does. None of it fits the dynamics of a visitation from God. You talk about upheaval. Some people talk about revival, like it's, going to be a charismatic Woodstock. I'll tell you what it's going to be. It's going to be hell on earth for some people. You're not listening very well, but it's just true. That's why I keep saying we're going to have revival and riot. We are already, and it's going to intensify. Cheer up, it's going to get worse. Confrontation is necessary. Once God bears the blade, once the revelatory word is given of restoration, then this coiling serpent will rise up, fire in his mouth, fire in his eyes. Once you stir up the alligator, you better be ready to fight to the death. And we are in it. Ladies and gentlemen, people looking at me right now, you're looking at someone who's in it, and it's unrelenting. We cannot pause. We cannot stop. We cannot take the next exit. We don't get to step back and say, God, send somebody else into the game. I want some bench time. This is the time to step up, not step back. We're winning. We war and we win. We have air superiority. Now's the time to pursue. And if you have to take your 17 stitches in your hand and point it at the devil, you don't back down, Pastor Marie.
Amen.
If he strikes your oldest son with leukemia, you don't back down, you step up.
Amen.
And not afraid, Pam, when he says, look what I could have done to your son. You say, look what you didn't do to my son, who now gets a new car, right? I mean, he gets a better vehicle. That's exactly right, Lord. That's exactly right. You don't back down. The ones who back down start running, and once you start running, you never stop running. And let me tell you, as a spiritual father, I'm watching the backs of some spiritual friends and spiritual children who started running. Some of them started running 5-7 years ago. They're still running. I still see their back. They are running away from what they should have been running toward. Amen. I'm not trying to be unkind. I'm trying to help you understand that once the process begins, it's too late to say, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. Sorry. Secondly, gadal, or massive. Once the Lord pulls the sword, it will be massive. Now, I believe in a remnant, so I don't believe massive means everybody. But I'll tell you something. There is rising up on all four corners, in places where you didn't know these kinds of people existed. The ones of which God said to Elijah, I have these thousands who have not bowed their knee to Baal, but you didn't even know about them. I'm telling you that those people in the caves, in the wildernesses, the people that, the unlikely ones, the Elijahs, the John the Baptist kind of forerunning, pioneering, people who don't seem to fit anywhere at all, weirdos like you and me are rising up. And I've asked leaders who are out there all the time. I see it myself. I'm telling you, Dutch Sheets says it's happening all over the nation. He said that it's not what you're hearing about, not what you're going to read in Charisma. Well, he didn't say that, but you know what I mean. It's not what you're going to see on Sid Roth necessarily. And I love Sid, and he's great. Someday I might be on his show, and I'm not knocking Sid. What I'm saying is, it's not the people that you think are going to lead the charge. And there's nothing wrong with those people. It's a group of people like the ones who stayed at the Alamo. I suppose that's not politically correct anymore to say that either, but anyway. It's like the people who signed the Declaration of Independence and pledged life, liberty, sacred honor, everything they own. Most of them died penniless because they put their name on that declaration. It's like the martyrs. It's like the prophets. No, it's like the ones who do not end up the way all of you hope that you'll end up. They just end up with their honor intact. They end up with their obedience complete. They end up with their submission rock solid. They end up burning with passion like Stephen, and heaven opens when they die. That's what I'm talking about. That's us. That's who we are. See, what I'm saying to you is, people who are waiting until they become famous to win this battle are not going to win this battle. Because the people who are waiting to become famous are not the people who are going to win this battle. But all across this nation, there is a massive uprising. It has not yet taken its maturest form because we have not yet restored kingdom culture. But as that begins to happen, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to have a generation of men and women, some young, some old, some middle-aged. We are going to have a generation of people in this time prepared and positioned, because God's response is going to be not only unrelenting, but massive. There are more with us than be with them. We are on the winning side. Now, many of you share dreams with me, but Pam Moody shared a specific dream that she had with me, and when I read it, she and I both agreed this is a prophetic insight about the fall of Hollywood. And that was before this thing happened with Harvey, with Weinstein. And maybe if you don't understand the dynamics of Hollywood, you don't understand that a nuclear bomb just went off in Hollywood. And they will never be able to recover for what just happened. You listen carefully. It was already in trouble financially. It's already got so much money, offshore money involved in it. It's already propped up in so many different ways. Hollywood has been in trouble for a long period of time, but with the fall of Harvey Weinstein, the entire conspiracy, the entire Leviathan is coming unraveled. The head has been struck, and Hollywood will never be the same again. Now, as you know, by the way, Jacksonville was the original Hollywood. And it was here that the films were first being made by Laurel and Hardy and by the funny little guy that did slapstick humor. What was his name? With the big feet? Charlie Chaplin. All that happened here. And right over in what's now Avondale, and some of the houses that are still there are in those movies. And we were the original Hollywood. We have a restoration coming to reestablish not only the culture, but you may not know this, but this is also the home of what you would call black cinema. Many of you don't know that. But the fine arts, both of black culture in this nation, has a root downtown, and we have a root in Avondale of entertainment. That's why I'm saying we don't need to destroy these cultures, we need to redeem them. Amen? There's even a good hip-hop sound. I've heard it. I've heard it in Brazil. It's an anointed hip-hop sound. But it doesn't display animalistic whoredom. And women who are just acting like whores. I'm not saying that hip-hop is the only form of music that does that, because they all do it, including country. What I'm saying is, there's a sound. You listen carefully, because you didn't get that. You're resisting my thought. My thought is simply, God wants to redeem every one of these fine arts. Even in Brazil, I say, God's not trying to destroy carnival. He wants to redeem carnival. And if you're not from Brazil, you don't understand how evil carnival is. How about this? God's not trying to destroy soap operas. Yeah, I don't know. I've been talking to God about this. But You know, it's kind of like, the prophet God sent to prophesy to Saul is like, you know who he is? He wants to redeem every form, legitimate form of entertainment. And wow, that could be powerful. I mean, for a long time, all we did was preach against movies until, what was the name of that movie that came out about prayer? The Closet or War Room. Until War Room came out. And then everybody's like, wow, we just need more of this. Amen.
Amen.
We don't need Superman or another Superman movie or another Batman movie or another Spider-Man movie. I mean, I don't think anybody knows how to even write a movie script anymore. They just go back and rehash the same old stuff. Somebody needs to do, like Roy Rogers again. Or the Lone Ranger, except do it right this time, instead of that weird one that came out. That's stuff I grew up watching. What I'm trying to say is, it needs to be redeemed. Because there's a purpose in it. There's a purpose, a reason why God planted these capabilities in the United States. And there's a reason why they started here in Jacksonville. We need to restore the purposes of this region so that we become a source of kingdom, fine arts, entertainment, in order to influence the minds and the passions of this generation. Can you say amen?
Amen.
All right. Thirdly, and this is the last one. God's sword against the Leviathan will be unrelenting and massive, but also chazak. It will be sharp. Now, when you talk about it being sharp, it means God's not going to just beat this devil to death. He's going to be very strategic, like a scalpel, in the way he inserts the death blow. And of course, I share what I've shared with you many times of how the Timucuan Indians here would harvest alligators. Because listen carefully, the very thing about the alligator that made it most deadly, and as you would say in terms of Leviathan, a dragon with fire, the mouth of the alligator, the mouth of the fiery dragon, the mouth of the serpent, where you get bit, or as Stacy is learning, some snakes spray poison into your eyes. Thanks to Rick's helpful creation of dread in her mind as she goes to Mozambique. Yeah, she's just helping her understand the joys of being there. So I suppose you could send her, like an impression of the teeth of a hyena and a lion, and, help her understand how big those teeth are so she'll feel safe over there. But anyway, it's the mouth. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, the very strength that would cause you to run from this enemy is the opportunity to defeat this enemy. Its greatest strength is its greatest weakness. And so, by producing a sense of intimidation with its mouth, you back up. You lose your opportunity. Because God's sword will be sharp. He's not going to start hacking on the thing. He's not going to try to beat it to death. But God is going to be strategic in his insertion of the blade. So we need to understand how to become precise as God's weapons and as God's warriors, to become precise in the way in which we function. Now, just for example, purpose is warfare. You say, what is spiritual warfare? Positively pursuing the purpose of God, and you run into God's enemies. We do not do spiritual warfare by getting up every morning looking for a demon to beat up on. We don't go looking for Leviathan. Leviathan finds us the moment we begin to threaten the systematic delusion. And so when we, and what is it that we do? What are we? We are people with a mouth for God. We speak for God. The rhema of the Spirit is the sword of the Spirit. Rhema of God is the sword of the Spirit. It is because we represent God with God's words. We speak God's words with God's authority. It is because we represent God's voice that we become a threat to the voice of Leviathan. So if we get quiet, if we whisper, if we shut up, we need to repent for silence. We need to speak the truth with love, with passion, in other words, with the same passion. In other words, when I speak for God, I need to have God's heart, the sound of God's heart in my mouth. That's why I say I don't back up for being angry, because God gets angry, in case you didn't know it. If you don't have a Bible, let me tell you something about God and the Bible. God gets angry. And He didn't stop getting angry because of the resurrection or whatever. God's angry. And He's angry all the time, as well as He's quiet all the time, He's gentle all the time, He's loving all the time, and He's hating all the time, because God's God all the time, and God's everything that God is all the time. He ain't like you and me. He's just God all the time. He is love. He is life. He is light. He is holy. He is. It's who He is. So God's everything God is all the time. You and I, we just who we are, in facets. But God is who God is in the ultimate way and in an eternal way. So there is no shadow of turning. When God doesn't cast a shadow, because He is light. No matter how you look at Him, He shines. No matter how you look at Him, He's holy. No matter how you look at Him, He's love. No matter how you look at Him, He's angry. We just want to leave that part out because moderns don't like to hear it. But here's the truth. God is judge. That didn't change. I said that didn't change. Thank you. Jesus said He didn't come to the world to condemn the world. Of course not, because it was already condemned. That's why He came. It needed rescue. He didn't come to say there's no more condemnation. He said He came, there's no more condemnation to them who are in Christ Jesus. Everybody else is still condemned. I didn't know if you know that, but they're going to hell. Did you know that? All right. I mean, that sounds like old-fashioned preaching, doesn't it? See, systematic delusion has inserted itself into the gospel. Yes. And we need to have precision. We need to have a sharp... You need to know the facts. You need to know the book. Yes. You need to know the purpose. We've lost kingdom culture, and we don't know we've lost it. And as it's restored, the people who are going to be confronting you first are church people, telling you what's wrong with you. You're the people who are most angry with you right now in the next 3 years are church people. If you are faithful in an unrelenting confrontation, massive confrontation, precise, sharp sword confrontation with Leviathan, you are going to be hit with friendly fire more than you are from any place else. So if you haven't gotten over that yet, be good to get over that before Thanksgiving. Or sooner. Sharp. Sharp. Is why I'm listening over here. Sharp. How sharp are you? So, people say to me, well, don't you think we need to have more love and less discipline? It's like, no, we need to have more discipline, then we'd have more love. I mean, you don't understand. You're like, well, you think love and discipline are two different things. When the Bible says the only reason you get discipline is because of love. And if you're not an authentic child of God, you don't get any discipline. It's only because you're authentic that His love invests discipline into your life. See, what are you saying? I'm saying we need an increase of discipline in this ministry, in our own lives, in the church in general. What we need is to stop unwanted action behaviors and produce the habits of righteousness. Yes. We need to rebuild kingdom culture. Amen. Now, when I talk to national and international leaders about it, they just get this strange look in their face, and look at me like, that's too big a thing, to do. And I'm like, how could there be anything else to do when that's the command of God? Teaching them to obey all I commanded you. That's the Great Commission.
Yeah.
Because he has all authority in heaven and earth, he sends us to the earth, and our job is to teach people to obey all that Jesus commanded us. Yeah. So you need to have a good marriage. You need to have good behavior. You're not supposed to steal from people or defraud people. Stop lying. Quit rewriting history to bear false witness against one another. Right?
Yes.
Stop your gossip and your slander. Don't even have lunch with a fornicator.
Yep.
That's what the Bible said. It said, do not eat with someone who's a fornicator or defrauds people or who's a slanderer. If you have a habit of spending time on your phone with people who gossip, then you need to change your habits because your habits are wrong.
Yeah.
And quit making your ears into garbage pails because it's not your job to process trash. We got better things to do. It's time to get sharp.
Right.
That's what I'm talking about.
That's good. Very good.
So where'd you get all those ideas? From the Bible. Do you have the Bible? You want to just scream at this generation. How in the world do you think you're going to stop systematic delusion if you don't even know the book?
That's right.
Get your nose in the book. So, I actually mentioned the idea in Kingdom Leadership Institute of having a 3-year Bible course where people went through the Bible verse by verse. 18 apostles vomited. 14 prophets went into massive convulsions. Because there's no way, the way to kill a Bible school is to teach the Bible. I've been doing this for 20 years, and if I announce I'm going to teach the Bible verse by verse, it's worse than calling people to prayer. I mean, it's not coming in late. They won't show up at all. You'll have one old grandma show up who goes to sleep while you're talking. That's it. You can give it away. You can pay people to sit and listen to the Bible taught verse by verse. And they'll give you the money back so they can go home. I'm exaggerating slightly. Literally, the most difficult thing to do in this generation is to teach the Bible. They don't want people want to hear stories. Tell me a story. They want to be something dramatized, So, every once in a while I tell a Bible story. But, as soon as I say, well, the Hebrew word is something, everybody, and then I tell a Heidi Baker story, and everybody's like, wow, Jesus is wonderful. Then you just say, look this up in the Bible. But anyway, sharp. We need to get sharper.
Yeah.
We don't need to get more religious. We need to get less religious. And we need to get sharper.
Yeah.
See, all religion's ever done is make Leviathan angry. But it can never defeat. And religion's so easily intimidated by Leviathan because Leviathan infiltrates religion. Now, I have a problem with the idea that one of the mountains of culture is a religious mountain. Because people are putting the church in that mountain. I don't intend to be in that mountain. You can go to that mountain if you want to, but you won't find me there. I don't even know. I'm not going to influence my culture through a religion mountain. Because religion is always death.
Yeah.
And Jesus doesn't live on a religion mountain either. He is the mountain.
Yeah.
Let me say that again. Jesus doesn't live on a religious mountain. He is the mountain.
Yeah.
He is the rock
Yeah.
that was hewn without hands that becomes the mountain
Yes.
called the mountain of the Lord because He is the influence that will change culture. So, everybody got confused. Peter Wagner would try to talk around it. Lance everybody tries to talk around it. Let's just quit talking around it and forget it. We ain't part of no religion mountain.
Right.
Now, religion is influential, but it's a part of every aspect. It is the overarching Leviathan systematic delusion. Now, we have several kinds of religion. In our world, we have scientism, which is a religion. The evolutionary progressives believe something that has no scientific proof. They just believe it. They put faith in scientism. And that's why they tell you these weird and strange things about migration and gender equality, because our species is reaching higher levels of evolutionary progress. And this is the reason why we need to destroy marriage, family as we know it, and why men need to start acting like women. Because this will be a higher level evolutionary progress, and somehow they missed the point that God created men to be like that because He knew this was a norm for the kingdom.
Amen.
I like you guys being tough. I want some hair on your legs. Quit shaving your legs. We're not going to start wearing makeup. That's no more lipstick, Rick. You understand what I'm saying? Elijah had hairy legs. John Baptist had hairy legs. Okay? What I mean is, men, let's be men. Be men in your home. Be men in your bedroom. Be men in your living room when you throw your socks in the corner like good men do. Eat burgers. Eat raw meat. Act like men. I'm only exaggerating a little bit. Because we need strong masculine voices. Your children need it. Your daughters and sons need some men in their lives. And it's Leviathan that is emptying out the masculinity of this culture. Now, God is going to bring that sword. Now, let me address this final point. Because some of you immediately like, oh, well, God's going to do it. Woo-hoo, praise God. I'm going to Disney. Well, God does that. Let me know how it turns out. No. When God says, I'm going to bring the sword, He doesn't mean God's going to do everything and we're going to do nothing. We wrestle. We wrestle. You're wrestling.
Yep.
And remember that the entire concept of wrestling, whether it be personal, of me personally, wrestling principalities, or corporately, us wrestling together, or in this concept of the nation, the remnant wrestling, and all of these things are valid points, valid perspectives, that the entire concept of wrestling is to gain a strategic advantage by having a better position.
Yes.
If you've never been a wrestler, you don't understand how wrestling operates. Wrestling comes because you gain a position of advantage, and through that position of advantage, you can leverage your opponent into an inferior position and pin them into place. So wrestling is all about gaining this superior advantage. It's like the sharp sword. See, this idea is simply that you and I need to press into improvement. Press more deeply into our mission than ever before. I'm talking about radical shifts toward purpose. I'm talking about reprioritizing your life so that you leave out distractions. I'm not saying that, Ruth Ann and I just took one of the most strategic things I could have done, we could have done together. We rested.
Yep.
If you don't have this weapon, you need it. If you do not possess the capacity to rest and be restored in the valley, so your soul is restored emotionally, then you're going to have a vulnerability in the day of battle that will cause you to lose some strategic skirmishes. I'm not saying you lose the war, but you are going to be more vulnerable. Rest is a strategic weapon, and I pull that weapon. Ruth Ann pulls it. I don't pull this weapon. Ruth Ann reaches over my belt, pulls it out, slaps me up the side of the head and said, you will rest, and I rest. Okay, that's what happens. That's reality. But yeah, she unplugs me so that this weapon operates. And I come back today and before you right now, because of rest, because of an intense season of obedience in Brazil, I come back to you after this rest, stronger, ready than ever before. I don't ever remember a time in my life when I was more optimistic that the purpose of God is going to be established than I am right now.
Amen.
I've never been more convinced that we're going to possess that campus, that we're going to have campuses in Brazil and in Europe and in Africa and in Asia. I've never been more confident about sending Stacy to Mozambique, not only because of her personal sharpening, but because I know this ministry's prayer foundation will surround her. I'm not afraid of Africa or spitting snakes. And listen carefully, I'm not afraid one bit of sending everybody in this room as a part of this house and a shareholder. I'm not afraid of sending you up against the dragon. His mouth open. I'm ready to cut down a pine tree and sharpen one end, and I want you to grab hold of that and stick with me, and I want you to help me thrust into the belly of this Leviathan a death blow to its influence.
Amen.
And it's all about purpose. We've been 20 years to get to here. The next 20, wow.
Yeah.
It's not going to, I mean, the majority of the battle puts us in great position where we have air superiority. I'm saying in the next 3 years, you're going to see a greater change than what you saw in 20.
Amen.
That by 2020, you're going to see something that you didn't dream would be restored to the United States of America. You're going to see it here. You're going to see it in our city. We're going to strive for it. We're going to press for it. We're going to see a change in the racial problems that plague our city and the poverty that plagues our city. We're going to see a change in the politics of our city, and we're going to see greater justice. We're going to see an awakening among churches. We're going to see the strengthening of marriage. We're going to see a diminished influence in the LGBTQ XYZ community. We're going to see less abortion in our nation and in this region. You're going to see an increase in the fine arts in this area. You're going to see an economic boom, and that will be based upon distribution. You're going to see this city become an oasis and become a source of hope. You're going to see mission-based here that's going to touch nations, not only us, but other ministries that are going to be like the Good Samaritan or Samaritan's Purse of Franklin Graham. There are going to be ministries like that that will grow here in this city, and people will say, oh, from Jacksonville, Florida, here comes the ship of hope, the planes of hope. Here comes the brigade of hope. Here comes the teams of hope that will be coming out. You're going to see men and women raised up here who will be sent into nations, who will establish orphanages. You're going to see some vanguard in Israel. You're going to see the strength of God in African nations and Zimbabwe and turnaround nations. You're going to see men and women here in China in the future. Your children are going to be God's ambassadors to nations. And there's preachers coming along. You heard them in there in that other room. And we always in this ministry have this concept that we don't entertain kids, we train kids. But it's not the church's job to train your children. It is you as a parent who are responsible to produce champions. Say amen real loud.
Amen.
But God is going to give us Jeremiahs to nations here. It's because of our faithfulness that we'll be able in producing prophets, our faithfulness in producing prophets now, that we'll have a prophetic generation. And many of these children already experiencing things prophetically that you and I never experienced until 30s, 20s, 30s, and 40s of our lifetime. And yet at 3 and 4 and 5, they're already experiencing prophetic things as God's preparing them rapidly. And are you talking about I started preaching when I was 15. And we're going to have preachers who are 15, prophets who are 15. Are you listening carefully?
Yeah.
I'm not sure that before that's even a good idea. But until 15 and 16, we're going to have some leaders. We're going to have something that I didn't have. We're going to have an in-house training. We're going to have not only homes that produce, but we're going to have in-house training to produce fivefold leaders and your children and those who join us, the hundreds who are going to join in this matrix of ministry, both here in the 5 points of ministry in this region, but also in 7 cities in Florida, and on 5 continents. I don't know what I'm going to do with Australia, because Australia's opening up. I don't know what's going to happen, because that wasn't on my list of the 5 continents, so I'm not sure how Australia fits, but it fits. We'll put it that way. And God's going to do something mighty through us, but it's going to begin where?
Home base.
It's going to begin here. You can't do it here. You can't do it there. So all over the world, nations challenged by Leviathan systems are needing leaders who can say, oh, that's what we faced in Jacksonville. We did it there. We can see God do it here.
Amen.
We can train you how to respond. See, we now have a responsibility to finish this job and to export this victory to other cities, regions, and nations on the earth.
Amen.
That's what we're going to do.
Amen.
That's what I'm giving my life to.
Amen.
So those of you who are thinking about quitting, that's all over. Moratorium on quitting, it's over. Amen?
Amen.